Hi all, welcome to Off the Post as we delve into something that's quite relevant as we edge closer to the end of the transfer market. Is market value of players. Are some of them really made out what to be if teams were to come in for them? And also the argument of if some of these players were to go from their league that they're currently in, if they were to go to a bigger league, for example, would they be able to cut it? Because there are some real contrasts in values across Europe, Asia, Africa, and over in South America. So there's a real contrast between the continents or the confederations, even if you wish to apply that, where there are some real possible, say, talents that are maybe sitting in leagues, smaller leagues, and you could almost use the argument of could they go to a better league and find themselves competing at a higher level. And it's certainly something that when I was going through looking at a lot of these players, that there is certainly maybe an argument to be had that maybe the price of some of these players are a lot higher than they possibly should be, but also the argument is that maybe due to the transfers of certain players to certain teams, because there's always been an argument of, for example, like the Premier League tax, for example, if, say, a player wants to move from one Premier League team to another, they're seen as a bit of a tax, and then sometimes due to like television rights, for example, in France and Spain in particular, and even Serie A, but also if teams are holding debts. It happened for a number of years in Spain and France in particular, like Valencia, Lyon, Marseille. A lot of these bigger teams within leagues found that they had to sell players sometimes much lower than what the market value of that player was, just to kind of clear debts. And it made for, I suppose, an interesting analysis of whether these teams are worth really that amount of money, or these players are worth a lot of money, or is it almost a sense of if a team was to come in, would it scare them off as well? Because they might say, yeah, you've got marked up at 25 million euros according to, say, to his transfer market. Is he really worth it? That's what we've kind of relied on here, is using transfer market to see what is kind of out there, and if honest, would players go for this kind of value if, say, Manchester City were to come in for X player, or Real Madrid or PSG, or even, say, a Saudi team, for example? It certainly makes for fascinating viewing. So we'll work through all these teams and leagues and kind of just take it from there and have a bit of fun into the bargain. So basically what I've done is, in terms of Europe, I went through the UEFA rankings for like club coefficient. I've basically went from 1 to 55, because obviously like San Marino's like the lowest ranked one. And basically Erling Haaland and Lamine Yamal lead the market value for the most valuable players in the world, at 220 million euros according to Transfermarkt, which is quite startling. Elise is next at 170, Vitinha's 140. For them to be the standout players out of 4 of the top 5 leagues. Serie A is 85 with Lautaro Martinez, so the top 5 leagues near enough contribute nearly €1 billion, which is quite startling when you kind of think about it. That's like 835 million, literally right off the bat, and you say to yourself, like, how? Like 835 million. That near enough is, like, for example, could be 2 or 3 transfer windows of, like, say, a summer and a winter, for example, in like just a league, say Premier League, or just all, like, say maybe the top 5 leagues even sometimes. It just kind of shows maybe how much teams are pricing up their players, and it goes back to, say, inflation and taxes, and whether teams would be willing to pay these kind of fees to make it happen, especially as we've saw for like Elise for Real Madrid. I think, what was it, like 130, 140 million, I think, Real Madrid, I think, were like willing to pay. So it kind of shows And that was about, I think, about 130, 140 million pounds. So it kind of shows they're not far away from that so-called market value. Then next falls to Portugal, as they are currently sixth. Victor Froholt of Porto at 50 million, which is quite an amount. I can't personally see him going for that kind of money just now, but I suppose, like, over the years, Liga Portugal have certainly had some big transfers. Like Gyökeres is a big one in recent times. Trincao obviously as well this season. So teams are willing to pay in excess of, like, say, £50 million, but Froholt maybe needs to do a little bit more. I would say, in terms of like Champions League, would be the perfect thing for him. Get more Champions League experience, get him to stand out more, and he could justify that kind of fee. Joel Ordonez in Belgium is €33 million. He has certainly been a star player for Club Bruges. Certainly someone that could justifiably go for, say, 30, 35 million. I think there is a few teams interested, and that's what Bruges have kind of set as, say, about 35, 40 million euros. Ricardo Pepe is the most valuable player in the Netherlands at 30 million euros. That was one I was not expecting when I was going through this. I thought, I think I was expecting maybe, say, like Veerman or someone else within the league, but Pepe, I suppose, is still relatively young and kind of steps up at that nicely. Osimhen at 75 million euros for Turkey. I did kind of expect that. Then we move to Poland, which is 10 million euros for Wojciech Monka. Certainly someone that, if was to go into one of the, say, top 7, 8 leagues, you'd assume in paper would translate to being someone that players would be interested in. Czechia belongs to Stepan Chalupic at 10 million euros as well. Another player that you'd assume on paper should be able to transition to a slightly stronger league. Greece is currently Christos Mouzikis. Obviously, they've had quite a few transfers, like in the last week, and like Palok lost one of their star players to Dortmund. So I'm going to assume this. Like, I would say Mouzikis is probably just taken the mantle. I could be wrong, but I probably should have. It's a few players are obviously in that kind of 20 to 30 million euro bracket within Greece. Denmark is Michelin's Francolino Zhu at 22 million euros. I think his value's dipped a little bit just because of end of season like injuries. I think he was about 25 not that long ago, and I know teams are interested in him at around 20 million pound. So Michelin are certainly trying probably hard to aim for that. Norway's in the Eliteserien is Patrick Berg at 12 million. I'm surprised he's only that. He is certainly someone that has stood out the last couple of years, and Bodo Glimt have really upped the standard within Norway to help the coefficient, and Bodo Glimt have also obviously put a lot of attention within their teams. So I'm sure that he, I'm sure would have, like, I think, was it like Fulham and a couple other teams have looked at around, say, £15 million. I think they have been quoted if they were interested in buying him. Cyprus's most valuable player is Beale for €4 million. I should add as well, with Norway, like Kasper Hogg obviously just recently went from them to Celtic for around £11-12 million. So it kind of shows that players within Norway certainly have value. I remember when Hoga went to AC Milan after playing them in a qualifying round. So it shows Norway teams will show an interest. Cyprus with like Paphos, and their teams that they've been obviously getting not just better in Europe, Apple Nicosia and Ammonia. These teams obviously have shown slight interest and trying to improve their teams. So I can kind of understand why their market value is starting to go up, but maybe not to say the 8 figures that a lot of other leagues are showing. The Swiss league belongs to Alvin Sanchez at 10 million euros. Hungary is Gabi Kanichovski at 4 million. Sweden is Matthias Sultanen at 10 million. Austria's Karim Kanat for 12 million. Rangers' Emmanuel Fernandez has the honour for Scotland at 18 million. And Croatia's Dion Beljo at €12 million. Now, the reason why I've done this as like a little block is because when you look at these leagues in particular, from like Croatia, Scotland, a lot of these teams, they generally have like one or two teams that kind of dictate the league. So in like Switzerland, it's kind of like near enough like a 3 or 4 team just now, because like Young Boys and Basel for so many years were the dominant teams, but other teams within the league have in recent years, like St Gallen, FC Thun, have kind of shown a bit of capability to compete with these teams. And at the same time, Basel and Young Boys have had off seasons to kind of be caught up, as it were. Hungary obviously is Ferencvaros most commonly, but last year was their first year in a number of years where they did not win the title. Sweden is kind of a mix of their top five, like Mjällby, AIK, Gothenburg, Deutsche Gardens, Malmo. They've all kind of got a core of teams. Austria usually has been Salzburg for so many years, but LSK have shown to be equally strong. Rapid Vienna, Austria Vienna, equally competing with their squads as well. Scotland has obviously been predominantly Celtic, Rangers, but Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen, Motherwell in recent seasons have shown to produce players where they've been able to provide big funds to their coffers. Like Hibs is like Kieran Bowie, and Motherwell's case is like Elijah Just and Elliot Watt, bringing in serious money for them, and that's what these kind of teams need. Croatia's been predominantly Dinamo Zagreb, Hajduk Split, and Rijeka, but these three obviously have had to over the years still compete to get a step above, like when they compete in, say, the Champions League. They still find themselves a little bit short, and despite years of when Dinamo Zagreb had like Dani Olmo and Mislav Orzic in particular, teams did show an interest in getting Olmo from going from there to Leipzig, and obviously Orsic has had a bit of a career in the Prem, Turkey, and now obviously in Cyprus. Then Romania, Stefan Bayram is €5 million. Ukraine, many moons ago, were kind of like a top 10 league. And obviously, like Shakhtar would go deep in the Europa League, sometimes even in the Champions League. I think they had a few years where they were like quarter finalists. But Shakhtar, obviously, back in the day, they had like no shortage of Brazilian talent that they would be bringing in and suddenly selling on for major funds. Obviously, now it's Kyle Elias for €15 million. I'm sure he was much higher not that long ago. He was like 2025, I want to say, when I was looking. But I swore that's what teams were quoted to try and be showing an interest. But it's certainly something to obviously consider. But I know with Ukraine in general, with Shakhtar and Dynamo Kiev, they have still been trying hard in their current circumstances to try and build competitive teams, not just for domestic but for European competitions as well, despite where they're currently sitting in the coefficient of around 24th. But hopefully, as people have said, if football heals for Ukraine get up the coefficient, then people are delighted. And it would be nice to see the likes of Shakhtar, Dynamo, I remember like Dnipro and Metalist Kharkiv and Zorya Luhansk. A lot of these teams were constantly getting into like say group stages or latter stages of Europe, but it's predominantly always Dynamo Kiev and Shakhtar Donetsk. Israel's Roy Revivo for there is €4.5 million. Slovenia is Svit Ceslar for 2.2. Azerbaijan has the honour with Mateusz Kolchalski. Nathan Fernandez for €4 million. Nino Marcelli in Slovakia for 6.5. And then the biggest jumps kick in here with Vasilij Kostov for €25 million. And I was like, that is quite a jump. €25 million for someone that I was thinking, seriously, €25 million is what has been kind of quoted for someone that plays in the Serbian league. I thought, if teams are willing to pay that, then fair play, like go for it. But obviously, at the same time, I suppose it is important to remember he is seen as a bit of a wonder kid. He is 18 years old, and has come through like the Red Star Belgrade system, or Crvena Zvezda. Teams that are interested in him, just for reference, are Borussia Dortmund and Galatasaray. I think the reason why Dortmund are really interested is simply because of they're building like a team for the future kind of aspect, which I can kind of understand. And it was like, it is quite a jump, but fair play that that's what kind of market value he's currently seen as. And if he was to move to a top 5 league or a top 7, top 10 league in UEFA coefficient standards, then you never know. Russia back in the day obviously were like a top 10, 12 league and had like everybody back in the day, Hulk, Danny, just being some of the European, South American players that they've had over the days. Obviously, I had Etu when it was like Ansi spending serious money. As I said, CSK, Zenit, Rubin Kazan, Krasnodar, they were spending serious money back in the day. Obviously, with everything going on, the coefficient and wars and everything else that's going on, teams are not as strong as they once were with, say, other European and South American talent. But Alexei Batrikov is 28 million euros and is currently leading the honours for that. Then from there, we kind of just go through a phase really of quite low money through the leagues. So like Iceland is Arnor Ingve Trotson, even, apologies if I butchered that, 600,000 euros. Republic of Ireland's Matthew Healy for 500,000. Armenia, Marko Lazetic for 1 million. Kosovo belongs to Giovanni. Latvia is Reginaldo Ramirez for 900,000. Bosnia and Herzegovina, Agon Elezi for 800,000. Finland, Amara Nalo for 1 million. Kazakhstan, the goalkeeper Ivan Basic for 1.5 million. Liechtenstein's a bit tricky because it's technically Vaduz, but there is other teams within. And Vaduz have 500,000. Wanka Pineda in the Moldovan League for 800,000. Faroe Islands is Meinhard Olsen for 400,000. Almir Kriziu for 750,000. He played against Hibs in the Conference League. That's how I know of him. Albania League is Paul Bernardoni, the goalkeeper, for 1.2 million, who's obviously not long transferred there. Belarus is Valery Gromko for 1.5 million. The days of Bati Barasov, for example, maybe a factor there. Lithuania, Ivan Litvinenko for 900,000. Malta's own Teddy Truma has the honour for 1.8 million. Joys of when back in the day he was worth a few bob due to what he was doing. Andorra is Elbis for 300,000. Estonia, Romy Sit for 400,000. Gibraltar's Manu Toledano for 225,000. Georgia's Andrea Bartshevili for 1.5 million. Northern Ireland for Rohan Ferguson for 300,000. In the Luxembourg League, it's Oliver Till for 700,000. I remember a number of years ago he was 2 million, so he has obviously dropped with getting older, injuries and whatnot. The Montenegro League is Marco Seaman for 700,000. The Welsh League is Rhys Hughes for 200,000. San Marino is Federico Benettini for 200,000. So it kind of shows for about near enough 20 odd leagues that if I was a team, say for example, in maybe the Championship in England or Scotland, or maybe a bigger league, I would say, does some of these players potentially get into our team? Could they become potentially better? Could they justify the transfer fee? Could they justify the wage? Could obviously, like Marko Lazetic, for example, he was recently at Aberdeen, and Ivan Basic has had plenty of a career in Croatia, but it certainly, as I said, shows quite a swing. And also, for some of these players, do they even want to maybe consider the move up within a league? Because I know for quite a few of these players, like Teddy Truma, for example, he's had an extensive career in Belgium and an extensive career in France, but It's quite startling to see him now, obviously, in the Maltese League at the age that he is. Probably could still do better for a standard, maybe, but he's maybe thought, I'll just go back to the Maltese League, and he's maybe just thought, I'll just enjoy myself. And sometimes for some of these leagues, whether it be Austria, Scotland, Croatia, because a lot of people work off data, and especially as people will look at all of they'll sit down and look at, like, say, transfer market, and maybe say, right, let's look at, for example, it could be, say, could be a Hearts, could be a Hibs, could be an Aberdeen, could be a Motherwell. They've maybe been told, right, we have to look at Giovanni or Reginaldo Ramirez, or maybe even potentially, say, Kachalski or Nathan Fernandez, for example. They're maybe a step up in value, but they maybe thought, could we spend £1 million, for example, to get this player in? Would the team accept that? But it's also important to remember, if the team, for example, is the league champions, they're in Europe, but they're guaranteed in the sense of the team maybe is playing in, say, not necessarily the Champions League, but they're maybe in the Europa League or the Conference League, maybe seen quite consistently every season, but the wage of maybe what they're receiving in the league is maybe just too strong to kind of knock back. And it's maybe where, for example, while it's a step up, maybe going to, say, Croatia, Scotland, Austria, for example, or even, say, Denmark, because teams like Michelin, for example, have a history of finding these talents from these leagues and making them go to big and better values, as it were. So Europe certainly has quite a lot to be interested about. Then I was looking over second and third tiers, and in England's case, a fourth tier, for comparing with notes there. Now, Ligue 2 in France, Tyler Tate, €25 million. Ligue 3 is Amanin Shaban for €2 million, so quite a contrast there. Second Bundesliga is Mohamed Amoura for now at Wolfsburg for €20 million. I know he has interest, so that could change soon. Third Bundesliga is Mirza Katovic for €4 million. I think that's like with Naderi, for example, when he was at Hansa Rostock. Obviously, Rangers spending big money for him. Serie B is Rafik Belgali for €12 million. Then between the three Serie C groups, Luka Topolovic is €3 million at the most expensive. EFL Championship is Jared Bourne for €30 million. Obviously, West Ham have hoped for more in general anyways. League 1 was quite fascinating because of Leicester obviously being relegated, but Wout Faes has the honour at €10 million. League 2 is Charlie McNeil at 800,000, so there's quite a swing there. But League 1 is predominantly just because of Leicester. Japan, the J1 League is Nikolai Valles, formerly of Brøndby. He's €4 million. The K1 League is Andrea Compagno for €2 million. The Chinese League formerly had a lot of big players in, from like Hulk, Alex Teixeira, Oscar, Tevez, and Elka. Countless others over the years, and spent serious money trying to make it bigger, better, and justifiable to bring in. But Kryzan currently now holds that honour of €4 million. I think Wule had it actually for a lot period as well before, when he returned back from Espanyol. But I think he's just kind of, obviously with age and injuries and stuff, and not to the same level he was before he left China to go to Spain, is kind of why he's dropped. Josh Sargent, €16 million, obviously kind of went for that from Norwich to the MLS. The A-League belongs to Panagiotis Kikanis for €1.3 million. Saudi League's top rated value player is Crescenzo Somerville for €45 million. I thought it'd be someone else, but shows what I know. Vitor Roque for Brazil is €38 million. Obviously, I think it was like Brazil and Real Betis is what he's had previously. UAE League, I thought was quite important to cover, because there and Qatar kind of have similar mantras of buying a lot of talent out of Europe and South America. But Braga's formerly Braga's attacker Simon Banza, €10 million is him for the most valuable. Indian League, obviously they bought quite a lot of players not that long ago as well, but Jamie McLaren has that mantle at 800,000. Thiago Almada has just recently rejoined the Argentinian League. He's at €20 million. Juan Rengifo in Colombia is 5 million. Peru belonged to Piero Quispe at 1.8. Uruguay is Leonardo Fernandez. The Indonesian League, because obviously of Johor, is Stepan Longcar, has that honour at 1.2 million. The Segunda Division in Spain is Sergio Arribas at €20 million, and Qatar League is Claudinho at 12 million. So around 80 leagues have been covered there, from top to bottom, and certainly for a lot of teams, if I was someone that worked as a scout and worked as, like, say, like within the football department, like trying to bring in like the recruitment department, I would genuinely be looking at a lot of these leagues and just trying to find someone that could potentially be that hidden gem that you could make serious money from. And I think that's what teams have to kind of factor in nowadays, really, with transfers and stuff. But obviously, everyone approaches football differently. But let me know, folks, your thoughts on all this. Certainly fascinating viewing in terms of what I was seeing there, who stands out, who doesn't, and certainly a bit of fun into the bargain. So have a good one, folks. Thanks for listening. Take it easy all. Have a good one, and I'll speak to you all later.